talk to these people, even like, I was talking to this guy who's got like a cash-based practice, and he's like, yeah, I just like, I don't want to like come across as like salesy. And I was like, okay, well, like the other half of that is like, do you think that you can help people? He's like, well, yeah. And I was like, do you think that there's a certain amount of treatment necessary to work through an issue, like based on a prognosis? He's like, yes. And I was like, so if you're just telling them what that is, how is that salesy? Like, you have a issue, A is the solution, this is it. And he's like, well, like, what if they can't afford it? I was like, but that's a you thing, not a them thing.
Yeah.
You're putting that, you're thinking that, not them. You have no
Right.
idea.
Right. No, I feel very strongly about that as well because the, I'm very lucky in the fact that I get to work with a lot of people that are very good at what they do, like yourself included, like you said, Corey included. Like most of the people like in my circle are, I consider them to be some of the best in the world at what they do. Right. So I feel very strongly about what you're saying because there's always going to be someone out there that is not very good at what they do, but they are good at sales. And you see it all the time. You see people like running Instagram ads. And you're like, oh, this guy's a fucking joke. But he's going to get a ton of clients just because he's putting himself out there and telling the world what he does. And that's going to appeal to some people. And they're having a broad reach, yes, and probably a very mediocre or even trash product, but the reason they're succeeding is because they're putting themselves out there, they're selling themselves, as opposed to people who are really good at what they do. A lot of times there is that kind of disconnect in the quality of service that they offer and the amount of confidence that they have around it, that they almost feel like I feel this sometimes too, is like fixing people's issues has gotten relatively easy for me. Like it's rare that I'm stumped or like there's a situation that I can't at least help someone improve on. But there's a level of guilt almost associated with that sometimes where it's like, oh, this is so easy for me. Like I shouldn't charge them this much or this or that. And it's like, well, if you think of what's going to happen if that person goes to someone else, they're going to pay a lot more money for a subpar service and they're probably going to get worse results just because someone else sold them, the dream that you could create for them and you could do it probably better than anyone else. But if you kind of equate the price tag on those things, like if someone goes the typical like PT, whatever rehab route, they might have very mediocre results after 8, 16 weeks. And then hopefully their insurance covers it. If not, then they're paying out of pocket for that. But there's going to be a certain point where they get good enough that their insurance isn't going to cover it. And then they're left kind of like holding the bag. Like, what the fuck do I do now? Like they have to pay out of pocket for, someone else that's probably going to do just as mediocre of a job. When in reality, if they would have just paid you in the first place, like, yeah, it might have looked a little bit more expensive up front, but they never would have had this issue again. Or they would have found a long-term solution and they end up paying a lot less in the long term. And I think a lot of people don't think of it that way, but I completely agree with you. It's like, if you're good at what you do, you have to tell people with a level of confidence that you can fix their problems, or else they're just not going to buy into it. And then they're going to buy into something else from someone that offers a worse product than what you do.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. So like, I made this mistake early on in my coaching career where I was like, because I have very high communication frequency and because I'm pretty invested in all of my clients' lives, even though I have a big roster, I'd hear what other coaches did, and I was like, "Oh, you do weekly check-ins? How pathetic!" You know what I mean? And it's just like this. It's this like pretentiousness, and then the other part of it, it's almost like a moral superiority. It's like, oh, I couldn't believe you'd do that.
Right.
And then I came to realize the longer it went on, I was like, oh, that's just one me being a hater. So it's not. It's there. It is in no way psychologically productive. But the second thing is, I had read this. I had read this thing called the Mathematician's Apologies. Have you ever heard about that?
No.
Okay, so super interesting. So essentially, I can't remember who the fuck wrote it, but the idea was he wrote this. He wrote this piece, and he was like, "No one has ever advanced a field by being a critic."
Mm.
Right? Like and he was talking specifically about mathematics. He was like, "No one who's ever been, a critic of mathematics has ever created a new theorem or solved a long-standing problem that no one could fix." Right? None of those people have ever done anything. Right? They just sit in
Mm-hmm.
the pulpit and they just poo-poo and talk shit.
Yeah.
And he's like, so in actuality, if you have a problem or you're seeing a problem, let's say that the market has shown, The only solution to a bad idea becomes a better idea.
Yes.
So if there's something wrong with it, then just show the solution. Don't waste your time and mental effort on pointing out the people that are bad. And it's always interesting too that the people who do that the most strongly are similarly the ones with the worst running businesses.
Interesting.
It's like, all right, well, you're just like, you're probably, this is probably a mental exercise for you to feel better about the fact that you're not where you want to be. It's like, oh, well, I don't do things that way, right? It's like, oh, I'm principled, I'm moral. It's like, okay, you mean moral and miss your car payment. Good luck.
Yeah.
And the other thing that, that kind of reminds me of is like, do you ever hear the story about like Picasso doing the drawing on the napkin?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where it's like, lady's like, oh, can you make me a drawing? And, draws it on the napkin. He's like, oh, it'll be $10,000. And she's like, how? That took you 2 minutes to draw. And he's like, yeah, and it took me 50 years to learn how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And that's exactly how I feel about, like I said, the people that you and I get to associate with. They're very good at what they do. And the thing about that is, and this is like in business across all genres, is that you get paid more to solve more complex problems,
Yes.
right? Like if you work for Microsoft, you're going to get paid more to solve a higher level problem than like an entry level like coder or something. Someone that's just kind of doing the work that's set out in front of them. And, and that should cross apply to whatever you're doing. Is that the more complex the problem is, like there's a higher price tag to be able to solve that. Or if it is a more simple problem, like even just rehabbing a knee ACL, you should be paid more to do that more quickly, right? Because time is a very valuable resource as well. And that's something, if you can get someone results faster, or if you can get better results in the same amount of time, then there should be a higher premium on that than there is someone who does it kind of, just kind of base minimal, like, okay, we got range of motion back in 12 weeks. We got strength within a reasonable amount within 16, and, kind of checking boxes as you go. So I think that's a really important part to realize of all this, to anyone that's listening and is running a business, is that the better you are at solving these problems, if you could solve them faster or you can get a better result in the same amount of time, like, that inherently makes your service more valuable than the next person.
Yeah. And it's, something that I really struggled with, especially when I go and started in-person personal training, was I kind of did this like moral superiority thing where it's like, well, if I do my job in the first year, like they shouldn't need to renew. And it's like, yeah, that's a fine prospect, but 90% of your clients are never going to go to the gym without you. They know how to do it,
Yeah.
but they're never going to go to the gym without you. And in actuality,
Hmm.
if you're uncomfortable with the renewal process, then you just don't have a sustainable business. And then you have huge
Yeah.
fluctuations month to month and year to year in your revenue. And it's like, how's that for building a life? And
Yeah.
so, like, so many people are just so consumed with this, like, this moralistic, like, they feel bad about making money. Right.
Hmm.
And, I remember I had a guy, he came, because when it comes to like the subset of powerlifting coaching, like I'm one of the most expensive in the world. And this guy come to me, he's like, well, how do you justify that price? And I was like, well, I mean, you've seen my clients, I don't have to. And I was like, I can tell
Yeah.
you the services that are provided. And I was like, but I don't have to. Like, here's my lifters. This is what they've done. This is where they started. This is where I got them to. And if that's not something that you can reasonably put in your monthly budget, that's okay. But if it is, like, I'm not going to justify this to you. Like, the price is the price, and I have enough leads coming in that I don't need to try to sell everyone that asks about
Yeah. And that's huge. And that's a big thing that I believe in too, is once you reach a certain level in your business, like you should never devalue your service. Right? People, like, there's a price tag on it, and then there's the value that you offer. And someone like yourself, I think that there's an immense amount of value, and the price tag probably doesn't even equate to that. Like, you're probably charging less than your actual value in the space, but there is the part, the practicality of it, where you have to run a business, and there's that trade-off of time, dollar amount per unit time. Yes, all of this has to make sense on your side of things. And it is the type of thing that if you have the right clientele, yes, there are going to be people that charge a ton of money and they offer maybe a good service, maybe a great service, but it's always being able to equate or communicate the level of value for the service that you're providing. And there's going to be a different kind of cost equation for that, for on the business owner side and on the consumer side. But finding the right kind of value proposition for your clients is a huge part of what you do in terms of business, but it always has to value your time. And that's something I absolutely believe in, is that once you reach a certain level of proficiency in what you do, you should never devalue your time, because what that does to the consumer is it devalues your service. They don't put as much importance on what they're doing. And like, for someone that's as good as you, or someone else that's on that level in what they're doing, it should be something where people have to kind of make a consideration of how important is this to me. And it shouldn't be just kind of like, if you're charging $150 a month, like, that doesn't, to them, there should be some sort of emotional process around giving that money to you. And it should be a number where it's like, I have to consider this because it is a sizable amount, or for the service that's being offered compared to whatever else is being offered in the industry. This maybe costs relatively more, but I can justify it because of the level of service or because of the progress that I'm going to get. And they look at it as more of an investment in the service, in themselves, in you, in that relationship. And that needs to be mutually beneficial. Like, there needs to be some sort of give on the client side of things, where they're like, all right, this maybe is a lot of money, and I could get this cheaper somewhere else, but I'm not going to get the level of service, I'm not going to get as much out of this, so I can justify spending this money for a higher level of value that I'm going to get from it.